I want to start off this episode by asking you a question. When you think of Africa, what do you think about? Poverty, donations, foreign aid? Those are the images most of us are used to seeing: charity ads, famine photos, and worst case headlines. But that's not the full story. Because while the world talks about Africa lacks, people on the continent are already building the solutions in health, in tech, in education. And my guest today is proof of that. Idris was born in Liberia, and from here in the US, he is building two platforms, one using AI to tackle nutrition challenges, and another creating real opportunities for Africa's youth to break into tech. What makes his story so powerful isn't just what he's building, but how, finding ways to research, connect, and make impact for Liberia while living thousands of miles away. So here's my real question for you. What does it actually take to build for Africa when you're not there 24/7? And how could Idris's journey inspire us to do the same? Yeah, so I guess the first thing I want to start with is that I know that people often say that Africa, quote unquote, lacks the skills to solve its own problems, whether it's probably in healthcare or the job market, and that the only way forward is to bring in outside expertise or, as an African, leave the continent for good and seek opportunity elsewhere, which is completely valid depending on the situation you're in. And you have built and are currently working on two platforms, Eve and TechBase, and are tackling both health and career development from within the African context. So my question to you is, why do you think it's so important to shift the focus from we don't have the skills to we need to build the systems?
This is a very interesting question. Uh, when you think about it, uh, one of the factors I always think about is institutions,
Mm,
right? So I have a story about when I went back home for the first time when I was in China, for undergrad. And when I go back home, the idea was to get a job,
mm,
to get a job. And I tried to find a job, went to the ministries, and I was everywhere I know people could hire me, but I just couldn't because I don't really have family in the governments or would just, take me in family businesses.
mm,
So I really didn't have a choice. I had to start up a company, pretty much. I just had to start up a company. And that was the first experience for me when it comes to understanding how these institutions matter to us and how no matter how skilled you are, if you don't have the systems that would channel what you bring into something productive, that is a problem. And I felt like my journey on entrepreneurship
mm.
did not as a result of my love for entrepreneurship, but rather as a means to survive. And I think that was, for me, I think it's just interesting to think about.
Mm. Yeah, no, I find that really interesting too, and it's, I don't know, maybe from my experience and like the content that I consume in terms of entrepreneurship, it's kind of like, I mean, you'll find many people who are in situations where they're like, "Oh, I want to start something because like I don't like want to go down the conditional route or but yours it's a little different because it's kind of like you didn't have a choice almost, or it was one of the maybe few choices that you could have chosen for yourself, but it's really cool that you ended up choosing entrepreneurship. So, like I mentioned earlier, you're building even tech base, and I want to switch over to tech base. So, I headed over actually to the website to check it out for myself, and honestly, I thought it was phenomenal. Like I am really impressed. Like you mentioned that this platform was designed to fill a talent gap that you see between Africa's youth and opportunities and today's tech-driven world. Can you talk more about that gap and how you, I want to say, strategically designed tech base to close that gap?
So like most of the platforms I try to design, because I really believe in like the human experience and
Mm,
this for people. So like the human-centered design. And what I thought about, what I usually think about is how would this be a good tool for me?
mm,
Question I ask myself. And I remember when I was back home, I tried to learn programming on my own, to Python, to code.
mm,
But it was a very difficult thing to learn because there was no structure. Like how do you find the right videos on YouTube, the right books to read, the right assignments to do? You really can't find these things easily. And there are other platforms you can use and pay some money to get it done. But it's also very difficult to do because most people where I'm from don't have like a means to pay for these platforms. People don't even have credit cards, you know? So when I think about, well, I had this problem and I really wish that someone would have developed an app that would just basically give me a pathway to
Mhm.
learn skills that I need to compete in the global economy. And I think this was the idea behind TechBase. And when we tried to do it with regarding the pathways, we figured it was something we could easily do. And it just basically help a lot of young people who really want to do these things, who are really, really motivated, but just don't know how to do it. And people somehow underestimate the power of structure. And I
Yeah.
think that's why a lot of people like your motivation is not really enough in most of the times. Like the idea of willpower is usually not enough to do things. Like you need a structure to allow you and enable you in a way to do these things. And I think that's the fundamental idea behind tech base.
Yeah. No, I love it. Structure is so important. I think in a world where, you have to go, you feel like you have to go to the finest institutions to like learn a certain skill and things like that. You really don't always most of the time. Like I learned a lot of skills that I have now simply from watching YouTube, but I do think like a lot of things that I wish I had learned maybe in school or just in general throughout my life, like if there was a more structured way of learning it, I definitely would have, mastered that skill. And I'm really happy that you've built a platform that allows others to have the opportunity to do that as well. So I really commend you for that. What's one story from TechBase or a moment that you've experienced so far that's really shown you how, the potential basically of what this platform can do for young people in Liberia?
A story of so basically my younger brother is really interested in tech and he's always trying to, you know, learn interesting things and code on his own.
Yeah.
Like one of the things I try to do with tech base, like I said, is your human-centered design. And like no matter how much you create, you should be able to create a platform that actually people really want to use and care about and solve their needs.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I did was like, well, I think I made a great product. But then at the same time, that's just my point of view. That's my perspective. Like that's my worldview.
Yeah.
And what if other people just don't see this as a great product? So what we did was we tried to like leverage it and we did like a beta version. It was live, and we shared it around. And we had like 120 users that got on the platform. And my brother was one of these people. And what I realized was for the past about 4 years, been trying to learn to do something around uh, data science.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, he's talking about very interesting conversation about machine learning. And I was really surprised, but I had no idea he was one of these 120 users. And he learned this on TechBase.
Mm-hmm.
And when he chose data science and he developed a lot of skills that I feel like you wouldn't develop easily if you didn't have an understanding of how to go about this.
Yeah.
And I power of tech base, you just need an internet, a mobile phone, and you're ready to go. And I feel like a lot of people have access to these things already on the continent.
No, most definitely, which makes it so easy for people to access. I think, like, I see most of the time a lot of things that get created on the ground and they're not accessible to everyone, or maybe they are to a certain population, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to last long. And to your point, even of like creating something not only just to know that yourself that it's a good idea, but actually putting it on the ground and seeing what people are doing and what they're using with it, which is why these success stories are like so important. Sometimes I think we let our pride and ego gets the best of us when we're trying to create something because it's such a the creative process is so fun and it's so enlightening. We sometimes forget to realize that, especially if it's like a platform that's going to serve others, we forget that they're the ones who are going to be using it. And it's I'm glad that you were able to have that story with your brother as well. So I'm remembering when we spoke on the phone a few weeks ago, you mentioned you're working on connecting Eve and TechBase so they can work together. Can you tell me and the audience in general more about Eve, like what it is and how you're trying to bring the two platforms together and what you hope that will achieve as well?
Firstly, I think you should know about Eve. Eve was basically an assignment.
Okay.
It was a funny story. I remember when I came to the US the first semester I had at the university. And what happened was I had a class, Nutrition 200, and
Mm.
it was nutrition composition assignment. And the assignment was pretty much to go and have a persona, basically a person, who was a lady, who was a teenage lady, who was pregnant, and trying to have a kid, and I should basically help her to decide like how she should eat. That was the assignment. And it just dawned to me that, well, so many people have this problem. Like I have my brother who was really sick for a long time.
Mm.
And went to a lot of hospitals. Like no one, everyone said that you're good. There's nothing wrong with you. But he had like a nutritional problem. He had a gut issue. So the way we fixed this problem was we just read a lot of books on nutrition and just changed how he ate. And that pretty much solved the problem. And I really thought to myself, well, if we had a platform that would help you to go through this, it would have been a lot easier for us. A lot easier, right? So, well, the assignment kind of just triggered me in the way that, well, maybe I can do something about this. Maybe I can find a way to develop a platform that's going to connect people to nutrition advice.
Mhm.
I also found was when I attended some sort of seminar, and a professor said something very interesting to me. He said, "We have a lot of information in the world, so much information in the world, but we don't know what is true and what is not. We have no idea. And how do we distinguish this?" And I think it's a very difficult thing to distinguish. Even people like me who study nutrition, it's a very difficult journey because you always have to keep reading and understanding what is the new research, what is the research saying now, what is the new tools that we have to use, what is the food that has been discovered that is good for us, that is not good for us. Is on the frontiers of always changing, right? And so what I thought about was, well, what if I can develop an app that helps you understand this, navigate this, does the research for you, and present you with evidence-based findings to help you take care of yourself on the most fundamental level, and that is eating and food. And that was where Eve came from.
Yeah. That's so cool. I think about a couple of things while you're talking. For one, I know I talked about it on a previous episode before. We have this issue in Africa of brain drain, and it's gotten to the point where we have a lot of like doctors or people in like the pharmaceutical space, who should be specializing in these career paths, who are leaving, because the opportunities don't present themselves where they are at home, which I completely understand. You have to make a living, you have to take care of your family, and if they're not paying you enough, they're simply not paying you enough. But like you said as well, with the world full of misinformation, I feel like I hear so many people, especially when I go back home, they want to have like medicine from abroad. They want to have like things from abroad, and sometimes that when they're sick as well, they don't go to the doctor right away, or they don't have the knowledge to really know how to act in certain situations. So I think developing a platform like this is really helpful, kind of like countering that reverse brain drain.
Yeah, and one of the things also we have to take into consideration is nutrition education alone is not enough.
Yeah.
Really enough to know things. Like I said earlier, motivation and willpower is really not enough to change your behavior.
It's not.
Not enough. So what we try to do with Eve is what social media did. They build the algorithms to allow you to be on the platform for as long as possible.
Mhm.
And you can use these same algorithms to allow people to just interact with this app and just keep them engaged.
Yeah.
A game sort of style where you have a daily objective. You do this, you do this, you do that.
Mm.
And it helps to improve your overall health on
Yeah.
the platform and as well as in real life. So like that's the fundamental idea behind like how the platform operates. And I think you mentioned about regarding connecting this back to TechBase. So what we found regarding TechBase, like TechBase, the idea behind the creation of the platform and the philosophy is a little bit different. The philosophy really is about employment. And because I'm a person who really is involved in health, and I think health as far as we know, is not as understood as we think we do understand it.
Mm.
The social determinants of health play a very big role in how healthy we are as individuals. Like, if you don't have a lot of money to buy things like food and healthy options for food, there's not a lot you can do about your situation, right?
Right.
So, the philosophy really behind Tech Base is we want you to be healthy, but we know you have money problems.
Mhm.
And the way we fix this is to make sure you get to work and have income and disposable income to improve your health. And that's the idea behind, that's the philosophy basically behind tech business and what we hope to achieve.
Mhm.
And by solving these social determinants of health, we hope to improve the general health of the population. And that's like linking Eve to tech base in the long run, not as entities like coming together, but basically seeking the same objective by working concurrently.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. And now I want to rewind a bit. for those who are probably listening who may not know, well, I know you were born and raised in Liberia, right? And you're now working on projects that, touch both public health and career opportunities, kind of like you were mentioning how you want TechBase and Eve to work together. I want to go back to the beginning. Like, what was it about your upbringing, the people you grew up around, or the challenges you saw firsthand that planted this entrepreneurial drive in you and made you want to make sure that Liberia both has better health systems and access to skills for the future? I know you mentioned your brother who was sick for a long time. You also mentioned the fact that, once you graduate, there's kind of just this expectation for you to go and look for a job, and like you couldn't, you didn't have connections and things of that sort. But was there anything else that kind of pushed you to create these platforms, especially help your people specifically?
Well, I think since I was a kid, I just had a very crazy creative mind, and I so many people like my mom thought I was going to be an artist. I and most of my youth, I spent a lot of time watching these movies. I think it was an era of like some sort of creation, and a lot of the movies we watched was very dystopian.
Yeah.
And it was about the end of the world and what are we going to do about this. And I remember when I was a kid, my brother and I would always just go on the blackboard and basically draw escape pods. Like how would we escape if the world was about to end? Like we're going to make a ship, make a plane that has like resources, farms on the ships. So from a very early stage in my life, I basically grew up in like a problem solving culture. That's
Mm,
what I think I grew up in. And we always try to figure out things in our imaginations, but like how do we solve for these things anyways? And I was like 4 years old and trying to figure these things out. And I think at a subconscious level, this creative part of me kept growing. And whenever I see things, I always think about them deeply and think about how do I fix this? How do I solve for this? Or how do I innovate so that people can have a better experience for this? And
mm,
that's always part of me. But I just never really went in the direction of trying to fix people's problems until a later stage in my life. But I think on a subconscious level, I've always been this person who thought creativity and artistic approaches to problems were always a part of me, basically.
yeah. Yeah, that's so wonderful. What would you, I think like my next question was going to be asking you about, if someone wanted to go back home or wanted to build something back home, like what would they need that, like if they wanted to build a platform back home, and they were based in the United States, like how could they do that? But I think like I first want to like kind of ask you, branching off of that question, if someone didn't have that, upbringing, maybe they didn't grow up in a problem solving culture, maybe they grew up in a culture where they, the kind of like the problems were solved for them in the sense that like you can't you don't have money, you go get a job. You need to save money, like you just open up a bank, like all of these things. Like if someone doesn't really have that specific school skill set, what is a specific skill you think that someone needs to develop in order to be an entrepreneur or to own something and and keep it sustainable and running?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. What do you need as an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
I think one of my professors recently I spoke to, and he's a very big fan of the idea of the why.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
think it is why. I think that's one of the most powerful tools any individual has, like the why. Like why you have this podcast. Like why am I trying to do entrepreneurship? Like why? Like why do you want to do this? Because fundamentally, I don't think everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. I don't think everyone wants to work in a public space. I don't think everyone wants almost anything that anyone else wants.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important questions you have to ask yourself is like, why do you want this?
Mm.
And if you can figure this why out, and I also believe like this why is a very complicated thing
Yeah.
because you lose it. And that's the funny thing about it, is you can start a project and you lose why you did this and why you wanted to do this in the first place. But I think as you go through this journey of life, you figure the why out again. You figure it out. And if you are guided by this why, I think maybe not entrepreneurship specifically, but whatever journey you decide to take, it would materialize because you would give it everything. And I think it comes down to the why.
Yeah, I think the why is super important in all aspects of your life. I feel like we have to be intentional about the things that we're doing. And if not, I feel like I see so many people stuck in situations that they regret because they know it's deep down, it's not for them. Especially like when we look at school and what people are studying and what they're going to school for. They might go for the name or they might do it for the money, but in the long run, it's not sustainable. Asking yourself why, and like you said, it is hard. It's one of the most difficult things. And I feel like that's something I fear. Like, I hope I don't lose it one day. Um, or, I just hope that it's not the reason why an idea goes lost. That's something that I tend to think about often. But I wanted to move on to the question that I touched upon earlier. But like I said, like many others, like I'm passionate about building something back home or for my people. But for many of us, I feel like our lives are established in the West for now. For those of us who can't be in our countries 24/7, um, but who still want to make an impact. So would like to ask you, like, what advice would you give to them, and maybe talk more about your own experience building a platform from a place you're not physically in every day.
About Africa, basically, like I have some point of views that I think should also be considered. I think, like, I study economics also, and one of the things that I found was one of the best measures for success for entrepreneurs, or well, basically anyone in society, is to have economic freedom. And
Mm.
the economic freedom is really like institutions or governments allowing you to be able to work, to create with less bureaucracy and protecting your intellectual properties. And I think a lot of countries don't do this for us so much. So that's why it's like a very, very complicated situation. I have a lot of friends of mine who started businesses. I have a friend of mine who started a brand business, a clothing brand.
Mm.
And it took him a very long time to get the agency responsible for intellectual property protection to protect him. He had other people in the market just make made his shirts and sell at a lower rate and undercut him. So these are problems you have to understand. So I think if you want to go back home and do some sort of business or investment, I think the first thing is to really understand the landscape and understand that there's not a lot of protection with intellectual properties. And there's a lot of bureaucracy about like how you go about starting the business and running the business. So these are the two factors. But also the ROI, the return on investment is so high that if you win, like none of this would matter to you.
Yeah.
So what I would say in this is I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I think a lot of times when people come to the US or the West to study, we tend to really focus on developing skills, like personal skills, because the West is very individualistic, right? There's a lot of individual culture here.
Mm.
And we think that if we develop these like really good skills to impact society on an individual level, it's great. And I agree it's great. But we also need to be able to understand policy and how our institutions have to be built to protect these skills. Like no matter how skilled you are, if you're not protected in this economy, it's a really difficult thing for you to do anything. It's like I said, the businesses you want to create get undercut by copyrights. So a lot of factors have to be involved in this. But I also think that we also have to really start to think about how policies are being created on the continent and how the private sector really has like a really big role to play in this and
Mm.
how our industries. I think that's a very underrated discussion that people don't really think about so much because a lot of focus is really on poverty and funding and so many other things. But from all of the studies that I found so far, one of the biggest factor when it comes to economic development is economic freedom.
Yeah.
This is a discussion we have to really think about and how we go about this. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure if we should abandon developing our skills for policy development. I'm not really sure what the answer is, but we have to figure out a way to balance these two out, the individual talent and policies to protect this individual.
Yeah. Yeah, I think understanding the geopolitical context of wherever it is you want to build or whatever it is who you want to build for is so important. It's kind of like I think about marketing and like I don't know, if you go to the store and you see a pair of jeans, you're going to try them on, you're going to make sure they fit, I think it's important to have the same mindset when it comes to building something for people or just building something that's going to exist somewhere that is not in your general proximity. You got to understand where you're building it, how it's going to get impacted, even like the weather. Like if it's just a building, understanding like the materials you're building with, who you're building for, the people in the neighborhood, what they've been experiencing the past 10 years, what their economic situation has been like. So I think like studying like your area is really important. Now, to branch off that question, what if what they want to create is like less something physical on the ground and more digital, and on the phone? Because there are certain, there's a little bit of bureaucracy involved in that. But I think about like apps that help people back home in the form of remittances. Like that's an example. Like you've probably heard of Sendwave, or we've heard of, I'm trying to think of another one. I think like MoneyGram or something like that. But like if someone wants to build a like a digital platform, kind of like you've done, and not necessarily physically and not physically has to go on the ground, do the same concepts apply, you think?
Well, regarding digital platforms, I think it's less of a risk
Mm.
because I think the value is just so much higher, and the cost to acquire customers is just so much less. And yeah, no matter how much the risks are, it's always a possibility to have like a unicorn on your hands when it comes to digital platforms. So when it comes to digital platforms, I think it's different. I think it is. I think so. One of the stats I also look at all the time is we have a lot of money going back to Africa through platforms like remittance, right? Across the world. We
Really?
have more remittance going back home than there is aid going back home. So that's something we should think about. And we have a lot of penetration with technology. Like when I saw recently a study, almost 70% of people on the continent have a smartphone and have some sort of penetration of technology. So this is an area that is overlooked in a way because I think most of this infrastructure is leveraged mostly around remittance.
Yeah.
This is a space where people can look a little bit more about finding other ways to enter this market. Yeah, because I think we do have the infrastructure for this. There's so many other things that you want to do that might not be possible because of the infrastructure. But like this is the very few things that we have going really well, and that's in the technology area. And I think the digital market has not really it's not as it's not really where we want it to be right now, but I think it's a space that has a lot of potential in Africa because we see the stats. It's just like a lot of penetration, a lot of penetration.
Yeah, especially if you look at how much gets sent back in investments. And investing isn't something that people have to, always physically have to go for. With technology now, with Zoom meetings and things like that, you can kind of talk to the people there, unless you need to physically look at if it is a product. And remittances, like you said, I definitely think that there is high opportunity there, low risk, but yeah, that's really cool. Now, my last question for you is: if tomorrow all of your funding, your networks, and your platforms just disappeared, but you still had your knowledge and your experience, how would you rebuild from scratch for someone in Africa or something in Africa or just in Africa, period?
Well, I think that's a very fascinating point of view because I think this takes me back to when I just went to China. I had like a really good plan in my mind about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to go about exploring the world. But then COVID happened and everything just went, out the window. But yeah, I didn't go with a lot of skills in China. And after I finished school, I still managed to start a company and did some interesting work around the cryptocurrency space and the cargo space. And the same thing when I got back home, I also managed to do some work around, the money exchange space. Yeah, I feel like a lot of these things happen as a result of the skills I developed over the time. And I have always been in the position of trying to figure things out. But I think one of the things that I said earlier was I've always known my why. I've always known this, and I've always had this drive towards innovation and just creating things, even though I wanted to get a job. But deep down, I knew like I'm an innovative person. I'm a creative person. I want to do something, like and do some disruption into some space. Yeah. So I think if any person, like whether it's me or anyone else, anyone who might just want to go back home and start over, I think the first thing you have to really think about is how do we solve a problem that people actually care about?
Yeah.
I think that's the one of the first things. That's why I like human-centered design so much because it really makes you to think about the individual who you want to serve and not you as the person trying to create. And figuring this out is like basically should be the most difficult part because you have all of the frameworks and all of the tools you have to develop whatever you want to develop today in the world. It's never been as easy as it is today to develop anything, right? And I think to develop for the sake of development is not a very good strategy. So I would say the first step would be to just go back home, find something that you have a lot of interest in, and talk to the people on the ground, talk to the people who you think might need help or might need something to be fixed, and figure out what is needed here.
Yeah.
And then you solve going backwards from this. I think like basically that's like the solution for everything when it comes to entrepreneurship. Find what to fix and talk to the people who needs this to be fixed and have a discussion with them. Make the product with the people's consent and also I would say with them. And I think that's the best way to solve problems. And I think if you take this approach towards any part of your life, I feel like you will have great results.
That conversation with Idris left me thinking about something we don't talk about enough. As Africans in the diaspora, we grow up hearing two stories about our continent. Either it's a place of poverty and problems, or it's a place we might go back to someday. Once we've made it here in the West. And because of that, a lot of us feel stuck in the middle, passionate about home, but also building our lives here. What Idris shows us is that you don't have to wait. You don't need $1 billion investor or to already be living on the continent to start making an impact. What you need is vision, persistence, and the courage to act even if it starts small. Think about it. He's tackling health and skills training in Liberia while living right here in the United States. He's researching, he's building relationships, he's testing ideas, and he's proved that the distance doesn't cancel out responsibility. If anything, it gives us new ways to contribute. For me, that's the message. We're not just bystanders watching Africa's future unfold from afar. We're part of that future, whether we choose to step into it or not. So the question isn't when will we go back or when will the West finally see our value? The question is, what are we building right now from wherever we are that Africa can stand on tomorrow? Because if Idris can start, then so can we. Until next week.